Hello everyone, very good morning and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 8 important topics for a detailed discussion. We have 3 columns that are very important for your mains, and we shall analyze these articles as comprehensively as possible. We have 5 more articles that are important for the prelims examination. So let's ensure that we cover all these topics as detailed as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from this initiative, do let us know, do support us with your likes, with your comments, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. So before we start the Hindu analysis, there is a small announcement. We are launching the Unacademy scholarship test. The test is scheduled for 10th of March at these times that are provided over here. And this scholarship test gives you an opportunity to win up to 90% scholarship on our IAS courses, along with many other attractive gifts and prizes. So those interested can register for the scholarship test by using the link provided in the video description. So let's begin with the analysis of the Hindu newspaper by taking up the first topic from page number 10. On page number 10, we have this important column that is relevant for Indian economy. The article is dealing with the recent issue that came up between Google and many Indian startups and companies. Over the last 1 week, this issue has been dominating headlines as it affects the competition in the Indian market, and Google's policies have come under question, and it has brought the Indian government as well into this tussle between Google and the startups in India. So let's understand this issue in complete detail. First, let's understand the context. Let's discuss what happened between Google and these Indian companies. Let's understand why the Indian government had to intervene, and then we will examine the topic of competition and monopoly in complete detail. Last week, on the 1st of March, the tech giant, that is Google, announced that it is going to delist several Indian apps from the Google Play Store. It went ahead and delisted many Indian applications from its app marketplace, that is the Play Store. So several Indian companies were hit by this policy decision of Google. Many major popular Indian apps, including job search apps like Naukri.com and even matrimony and dating apps like Shadi.com, Bharat Matrimony, and many others, they were all hit by this delisting policy of Google. So Google basically pulled these applications. They were no longer listed on Google Play Store, which is the marketplace for all the apps that we download on our Android mobile phones. So this decision of Google obviously affected these Indian companies, as people could no longer download their app or continue the usage of their app. And this was declared as a dark day for India's internet ecosystem. Several startup founders, entrepreneurs, they came out openly in the public and criticized Google for its policies, for its exploitative policies. Even popular entrepreneurs like Anupam Mittal, the founder of Shadi.com, tweeted that this policy of Google is a new form of colonization. He said that Google is extracting an illegal tax or a lagan from Indian companies, and it is crippling innovation and killing the new startups. So there was a complete uproar amongst Indian companies and Indian startups against this policy of Google. So this led to the intervention of the government of India as well. The Ministry of Electronics and IT, which is the concerned nodal ministry, it summoned Google and as well as the Indian companies that were affected. And finally, they have worked out a temporary solution. A temporary solution has been worked out, and Google has agreed to list these apps back on its Play Store. Now, the big question is, why did Google remove the apps in the first place? What was the logic behind it? According to Google, to be listed on the Play Store, let's say you want to list your apps on the Play Store and you want to provide in-app purchase and in-app subscriptions on your app, right? According to Google's payment policies, you have to pay a part of your revenue, share a part of your revenue with Google itself. Google's policy is that it is offering its marketplace, it's offering its Android operating system and the Play Store marketplace where you can list your apps, where developers can start generating revenue through their in-app purchases and in-app subscriptions. So Google claims a part of this revenue. It claims that a certain percentage of the revenue should be paid to Google. So those apps which were not paying this bill, which were not abiding by the billing policy, the payment and billing policy of Google, those are the apps which have been affected. So many dating and matrimony apps, even job search apps from Naukri to Shadi to Bharat Matrimony, they all were delisted by Google, which led to this outroar amongst Indian industry leaders. So with the intervention of the government of India, now Google has agreed for a temporary solution. It's not a permanent solution. Google has listed these apps again. But however, there is a condition that they have to pay the dues. These apps, they have to pay the dues that they owe to Google as per its payment and billing policy. So that is the point of contention. Now, it becomes very important to get into this topic in detail because the issue which comes up here is the issue of competition and monopoly. There is a criticism against Google and even other similar tech giants that they are abusing their dominant position in the market. But these companies claim that expecting a part of the revenue to be shared with them is a fair policy because they have invested in creating these platforms, in these operating systems and marketplaces, right, which has opened up these new opportunities for developers around the world. So Google, Apple, and others, they claim that this is only fair for the developers to share a part of their revenue with these companies as they are the ones providing the platform. But the smaller startups and the companies who cannot afford these high transaction fees and this revenue sharing model, they are completely against this. And they believe that this kills competition. They believe that this is an abuse of the dominant position that Google and others have in the mobile ecosystem or in the mobile industry. So let's understand this topic in detail. Let's get to the root of the problem. The problem is primarily related to Google's platform fees. Right? If you look at your mobile phones, right, those which are running on Android operating systems, they come preloaded with a marketplace, which is nothing but a Play Store. That is where we all download our applications, right? And there are many apps which provide for in-app purchases and subscription. Let's say you downloaded a OTT app, you subscribe to their monthly plan or yearly plan, right? Or let's say, for example, you downloaded the Unacademy app on an Android mobile phone through Google Play Store and you subscribe to our course. So when you're making that payment, right, the amount that you have paid as a subscription fee for a particular app, right, part of it has to be shared by the app developer, by the company with Google. So this is the payment fee, the platform fee that is charged by Google. Because Google's logic is that you're using their operating system, which is Android, you're using their marketplace, that is Play Store, and in many cases, Google even mandates companies to use its own payment gateway as well, which is based on Google Pay payment system. So this is an entire ecosystem which Google has created for itself, and it has achieved a market dominating position, almost a monopoly position. It expects every app developer to abide by these policies, these guidelines, and sometimes it has forced companies to channel the payments through its own payment gateways. Right? And out of all the transactions that are done, all the in-app purchases that are done, all the subscriptions that are taken by the customers, part of that revenue has to be shared and paid as a platform fee to the developer. That is the Google. That is the company Google. Now, this transaction fee is very, very high. The commission which has to be shared is extremely high. It's anywhere in the range of 11% to almost 30%. Especially in markets like India, Google has been consistently charging around 15 to 30% of the revenue generated. Now, this high amount of platform fee obviously imposes a huge cost on the small startups which are just starting out. Even on large companies, for example, right, a transaction fee of 15 to 30% is a massive amount which affects the operation of the developer itself, the company itself. So many Indian companies and many other global startups as well, they all have an issue with companies like Google. They all believe that Google is misusing its dominant position, its monopoly in the market, forcing them to abide by its restrictions on the Android operating system, on the Play Store, and on the payment gateways, and extracting money from them, extracting revenue from them, which is crippling innovation, research, and entrepreneurship. Whereas Google says that it's only fair to expect the developers who are making revenue from their platforms to pay a part of their revenue to Google, right? And Google believes that this is a fair payment system. But however, in many developing markets, even in developed countries as well, in the European market, for example, and also in countries like India, South Korea, Vietnam, which are all startup hubs where there are hundreds of tech-based startups, right? There it has become a big issue that small companies and startups, which are crucial for the industry, for creating jobs, for carrying out research and innovation, right? They won't be able to pay a transaction fee of 11, 15, or 18, or 20, or 30%. So after regulatory intervention in India and South Korea, Google has slightly reduced the transaction fee. Until a couple of years ago, the transaction fee was in the range of 15 to 30%. So following the regulatory action in India, South Korea, and in other markets, Google has slightly reduced the transaction fee, brought it down to 11 to 26%. But still, this is very, very high according to the small companies and startups, right? Indian developers particularly believe that this is a very high price to pay, and they have even brought a litigation against Google. There are pending cases at the Madras High Court. There are cases pending at other courts and tribunals as well, including the Competition Commission of India, where Indian startups and companies have challenged this platform policy and the payment fee policy of Google. According to Google, these companies are not sharing the revenue, so they're not abiding by its guidelines, and hence Google has the right to delist them. But the companies are arguing that if Google does this, then it's going to kill competition because Google has a dominant position in the market and it can easily abuse this dominant monopoly position that it has. So, on one hand, you can understand why Google expects a certain fee to be paid for making use of its platforms. Right? Obviously, Google would have invested heavily in developing the operating system, the Play Store, and creating that entire ecosystem of where apps can be, downloaded and sold as a marketplace. Right? Google would have invested enormous sums of money behind creating this ecosystem. Obviously, Google would expect revenue and profit from this. But however, it's about the margin of profit. No one is contesting that Google should not be paid any revenue at all. Right? The argument is about the amount of the transaction fee. So most companies believe that the size of the fee is very, very high. It is so high that it can kill the small companies. It can kill startups. If it was, let's say, under 5% or under 7%, this is something companies could have afforded. But for a startup or just a newly founded startup, which is not so well funded, right, they won't be able to afford the high transaction fee. They can't share 15 to 30% of the revenue or even 20 to 25% of their revenue with Google just because they are using the platform, right? So this is where the topic of competition versus monopoly comes up. Now, please think about your mobile phones. Think about your Android phones and also those who have Apple phones or iPhones. Think about the whole ecosystem that these companies have created. No wonder they have done a phenomenal job in their research and in their innovation, right? But the point is, they are creating such an ecosystem, they've already created such an ecosystem, which keeps the customer, the developers, the vendors locked within their ecosystem. Now, for example, if you go to, let's say, a mobile store and purchase a new mobile phone, let's say you bought an Android phone, it comes preloaded with the Android operating system, right? There are many applications which are already pre-installed by default. By default, Google would have tied up with the mobile manufacturers. Since Google has a dominating position, mobile companies would obviously work closely with Google itself. And since The Android phones are based on the Android operating system developed by Google. Right? Google will have more leverage over the mobile companies as well, those who manufacture the mobile phones. So these Android phones, they come preloaded with certain applications by default. Now the point is, Google has many apps, many applications, from music to movies to ebooks, right, to various office tools. Google itself has a wide variety of other applications which are in direct competition with other rivals and competitors. Right? Now, what if Google strikes such a deal with these mobile manufacturers that only these apps are preloaded as a default, which in a way pushes the user to rely more on Google's apps? I'm sure many of us, we rely on Google Drive, Google Sheets, Google Docs, right? The same holds good for Apple. We rely on Apple Music or Apple TV, right? But there are other competitors as well, right? They may not get a level playing field. They may not get a fair chance to compete with the other applications owned by Google and Apple themselves. If you look at the marketplace where we download the apps, right? Google allows apps to be downloaded only through the Play Store. Any subscriptions, in-app purchases you make has to happen through the Play Store. And sometimes they've also placed conditions that payments have to happen through the Google Pay payment gateway itself. The app developers have to channel payments through Google's payment system itself, right? In many cases, they haven't allowed the diversion of this traffic to other outside payment gateways or third-party Play Stores. So this is creating a locked, restricted ecosystem, right, which benefits Google and promotes Google's dominant position in the Android market. We are talking more about Google here because Android phones have a bigger market share. Compared to the number of people who own iPhones and other phones with other operating systems, Google's Android has the most dominating position in the market. That is why its impact is much more on the industry. The same logic holds good for Apple as well. In fact, Apple has created an even more restrictive ecosystem. You have the Mac operating system on the iPhones, right? And you download your apps from the App Store. And Apple also makes it restrictive that any in-app purchases, subscriptions have to go through Apple's own payment gateway. If the developer of an app, if they try to route the traffic through another payment gateway, Apple will restrict those applications. If they try to provide for, let's say you try to download an app from a third-party Play Store or a marketplace, you can't do that because Apple's Mac would have restricted all the downloads only to the App Store. So Google and Apple say that this is necessary to ensure security. This is necessary to protect the customer, to ensure that fraudulent, malicious apps are not downloaded. Right? They say that this is because of cybersecurity, digital privacy, etc. But at the same time, they are creating a locked, restricted ecosystem of their own platforms. And this gives them to exploit their dominant position to push and promote only their applications. Right? So even if there are other startups trying to create similar products or even better products, they can never compete with Google or Apple because they already have a dominating position with regard to access to customer. So those who own iPhones, I'm pretty sure, right, we all rely on apps that Apple itself has developed. By and large, instead of, let's say, subscribing to Netflix or Disney Hotstar, we may prefer to watch on Apple TV. Instead of subscribing to Spotify or Wink and other music platforms, you might subscribe to Apple Music, right? Because these apps come preloaded. They have an unfair advantage already. And since there are restrictions on payment gateways, restrictions on where you can download the app, the developers of these apps who are competitors, rivals of Apple and Google, they don't have a fair playing field or a level playing field to even compete with these tech giants. Plus, they're extracting a very high transaction fee. For every in-app purchase and subscription, Google is charging 15 to 30%. Same with Apple. Even Apple's payment fees, platform fees is extremely high. So essentially, small startups, they can't even survive. They can't afford to pay such high transaction fees. So that is where the argument comes up that are these companies, the big tech companies, are they exploiting their dominant position? Are they abusing the monopoly that they have created in the mobile ecosystem? If such monopolies are created, it will always cripple competition. The competition is good for the market, it's good for the customer. Only when multiple companies are competing, that is when quality will improve. That is when prices for the customer would be reasonable, right? If there is a monopoly or even a duopoly where only one or two companies are dominating the market, they will fix prices at a higher rate, make more profits to the disadvantage of the customer. The customer gets affected as they are expected to pay more for the same service. Also, these companies will not have an incentive to focus on quality, innovation, right? And as long as they kill competition of the new startups and the new companies that are coming up, they can dominate the market and they don't have to bother too much about innovation, right? So this eventually affects the market itself. It affects the whole segment itself. So in general, in the economy, in any sector, competition is always good. More the competitors, better it is for the customer, better it is for the market. Because companies will be now driven to focus on innovation, focus on research, focus on creating a quality product, focus on satisfying the customer. The customer will become the king as long as there is competition. But the moment these monopolies arise, customers' interest will get compromised, right? You will end up paying more. These monopolies will end up making more profits. So that is the big concern that comes up. Small companies, small startups can never compete with the giants who have already established a dominating position. That is why Google and Apple, they're accused of unfair trade practices. They're accused of exploiting their dominant position and their monopoly and killing competition. Now, let me present one very interesting case, which highlights the anti-competition policies of Google and Apple. This case is very popular, in fact. It's related to Spotify versus Apple Music. Spotify is this very popular music streaming app. I'm sure many of you would be using it. Spotify filed a case a couple of years ago against Apple, and the case was filed in the European jurisdiction at the European Commission, which is one of the principal organs of the European Union. Spotify alleged that Apple's discriminatory policies, they are designed to promote Apple Music while creating unfair restrictions for Spotify. See, Apple owns the operating system, the Mac operating system. The marketplace, that is the App Store, is again owned by Apple, right? And any app listed on their App Store for all the payments and subscriptions, they force the payments to be routed through their own payment systems, including Apple Pay. So for a company, for an outside competitor like Spotify, it was very challenging to abide by all these restrictions of Apple, share the revenue as well, while competing with Apple's own product, which is Apple Music. So in a way, this is a vested interest. Apple will always have a vested interest to misuse its operating system, its App Store, and the payment gateway to promote its own product like Apple Music, which will always create an unfair playing field for other competitors like Spotify. Spotify's argument was we can never compete with Apple Music. It's impossible because they are misusing their dominant position. Now, Apple Music does not have to share 20-30% of its revenue because it's owned by the same company which owns the operating system and the App Store, right? But competitors like Spotify, they are expected to pay the platform fee. They have to abide by all the restrictions imposed by Apple on them, right? So this is where it approached the European Commission and filed antitrust, anti-competition charges against Apple. And this was a landmark case. In this case, the European Commission upheld the claims of Spotify. It declared that Apple's policies were anti-competitive and it levied a massive fine of 1.84 billion euros on Apple. Is that clear? So such cases have come up in many other jurisdictions. In United States as well, Epic Games had sued Apple on similar grounds. That Apple is promoting few inbuilt default games, which is in direct competition with Epic Games, right? And Apple always has an unfair advantage because of the high transaction fee and the locked ecosystem it has created. So here as well, Apple was sued by rival competitors and other companies. This has happened in India, it has happened in South Korea, in Australia, and in many other jurisdictions. So regulating these companies has indeed become a major concern today. In India, the Competition Commission, which enforces the Competition Act, which protects competition in the market and prevents monopolies and anti-competitive policies, it has levied a massive fine of almost 930 crores on Google 2 years ago. Similar charges were brought up against Google that it was misusing its dominant position, and Google was fined by the Competition Commission of India. A fine of 936 crores was imposed, but Google has not yet paid the fine amount. It has challenged this ruling. It has approached high courts and it has approached the National Company Law Tribunal as well. And it has tried to avoid paying this penalty that was imposed by the Competition Commission of India. So this is an ongoing case in India itself. So essentially, the app developers, they do have a very valid argument. Google and Apple and others, they might say that they are providing the platform, they are offering choices with regard to payment as well. They're only expecting a fair transaction fee to be shared with them. But again, as I told you, there's nothing wrong in expecting a share of the transaction fee. The problem is with the quantum. The problem is with the high charges that they are levying. Anything between 11 to 26%, right, is extremely high. It was 15 to 30% before. Now they have brought it down to 11 to 26%. It is still very, very high for smaller companies and startups. It's essentially going to kill those companies. They can never compete with the products of Apple and Google. That is the whole point. And now the big question is, what's the way forward? What can be done? This requires a strong regulatory intervention. Europe is one market where European Union carries out a very strict regulatory intervention and it has levied penalties on these big tech companies. There are very stringent laws and policies against monopolies, against anti-competitive policies in the European market. That is something which has to be done in other jurisdictions as well. There is a need to regulate competition, particularly in the app store market. Today, the dominant position is held by Google's Play Store and of course even by Apple's App Store. There should be a push towards providing for third-party app stores as well, or third-party marketplaces. The transaction fee, which they are charging as a platform fee, has to be reduced. It has to be within reasonable limits. The current default settings on the app, on the mobile phones, this has to undergo a change. Right now, Google is tying up with mobile manufacturers. Apple produces its own phones as well, right? So they are giving priority for their own applications, which are included by default, which creates an automatic disadvantage for the other competitors. So these are the issues which have to be tackled. In fact, it's not just that. There are many similar issues, related issues which have come up. For example, in Australia and also in the European market, a similar tussle had broken out between Google and news publishers. That is basically newspapers and media outlets. I'm sure all of you know that one major resource, right, that we all rely upon on the internet is to read news, right? A large part of the news that we consume comes through Google search or through social media platforms. We may not visit the websites of the newspapers themselves, right? We largely rely on Google feed, on the suggested browse features, or maybe on directly on social media apps to read news. But the problem here is companies like Google and other social media firms, even Meta, right? Then all the major social media platforms, they are making revenue by pushing news articles on their platforms. But who created this content? Who generated this content? It was generated by the news publishers. So media outlets like, let's say, The Guardian, New York Times, Hindu, Indian Express, they are the ones creating news. They are the ones generating the content, right? They are investing in collecting news from around the world, compiling it and presenting it to you. So ideally, they deserve this revenue. But of course, the internet-based platforms, social media firms, they are offering a platform where these news articles can be showcased. So they also deserve a part of the revenue. But however, what these companies are doing is that in most markets, they are taking this revenue entirely to themselves. whatever ad revenue is generated through news articles, Google and other platforms, they were cornering this entire revenue. They were not sharing even a penny, even a single penny with the news creators, with the media outlets. So in this regard, Australia recently passed a law a couple of years ago. Australia brought out a law mandating companies like Google and Meta to share the revenue with the media publishers. So now there is a legal mandate on them. They can't corner the entire revenue because they didn't create the content. They're simply pushing it, promoting it, distributing it. But who created the content? They deserve a larger share of the revenue, right? So there are such laws being brought about in various jurisdictions, even in the European market. Social media firms and the tech companies are mandated by law to share the revenue with the content creators, with the ones who generated the news, that is the media outlets. So that is the kind of regulatory intervention needed to tackle the dominant monopolistic positions that some of the tech companies are acquiring, right? Especially in countries like India, where startups play a critical role in our ecosystem, right? They create jobs, they provide for innovation, they're becoming the backbone of the Indian market. We can't allow companies like Google or Apple or any other tech company which has a dominating global position, right, to misuse and abuse its position to cripple innovation and competition in the country. That is where regulatory intervention is needed. The government needs to bring out further policies and even maybe a law following the standards set by the European Union, Australia, South Korea. They've all come out with better policies than India. So that is something we need to adopt into the Indian context. So now let's look at the next article on page number 10. We have a column referring to the policy of reservation and the reservation which has been recently extended to the Maratha community in the state of Maharashtra. So that topic is in news because recently, just a couple of weeks ago, Maharashtra Legislative Assembly has passed a bill that provides almost 10% reservation in total to the Maratha community. So in government jobs and as well as in education, a cumulative 10% reservation has been extended through this new bill that was passed by the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly on the 20th of February. So as a result of this new reservation which has been added, Maharashtra has breached the 50% cap by a very big margin. And this goes against the landmark ruling of the Supreme Court, through which Supreme Court had placed a 50% cap on reservation. Now the question is, will this reservation provided to the Maratha community, will it stand judicial scrutiny? Will it stand judicial review? Right? The other big question is, does the Maratha community deserve reservation? Right? Why is reservation provided in the first place? Right? So these are the questions that we need to examine and answer. So first, let's understand why the Maratha community has been demanding reservation and when did this demand come up. So this movement, which has acquired a lot of political and electoral significance in Maharashtra, it started in 2014 under the leadership of Narayan Rane. Narayan Rane, a popular leader, was heading a non-statutory committee, a committee without any legal backing, right? It was established through government's executive orders. There was no statutory backing for this committee. So the Narayan Rane committee, it recommended that the Marathas in Maharashtra are a backward class. The committee held that Marathas constitute almost 32% of the state's population, but majority of them are backward. They are living below poverty line. It argued that they don't have access to education and jobs, and they deserved reservation, the policy of affirmative action, in order to uplift the community. So this is what led to the start of a political movement in Maharashtra to claim reservation for the Maratha community, right? So based on the recommendations of the Narayan Rane committee, there was a lot of political mobilization that happened within the Maratha community where they started demanding for reservation in jobs and in education to uplift the Maratha community. So based on this popular demand, the then government brought out an ordinance reserving almost 16% of government jobs and seats for the Marathas. The same bill had provided additional 5% reservation for the Muslim community, right? And 16% reservation was provided for Marathas in jobs and in education. Now, the question is, are the Marathas really backward? Right? This is a question which has to be examined. And what happened to this previous ordinance? Because later there was a law as well which was brought in by Maharashtra to provide for this reservation for Marathas. But however, this law was struck down by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has repeatedly struck down any such attempts to provide reservation to the dominant class. If you look at Marathas, for example, they constitute 32% of the state's population, and by every standard, majority of them, they actually fall above the living standards. But the argument that Marathas constitute the most backward class or one of the most backward classes, it doesn't stand legal scrutiny because there isn't enough data to back up these claims. The criticism here is that this is largely a political mobilization to misuse the quota system to please the Maratha community and to corner votes. Essentially, in India, reservation has become a policy, a tool for electoral appeasement and to create vote banks by pleasing certain castes and communities. So you are seeing a large-scale political mobilization in Maharashtra where the majority community is being mobilized and majority is being projected as one of the backward classes. This is not specific only to Maratha community or only to Maharashtra. We have seen this happening in other states as well. In Gujarat, in Rajasthan, in Haryana, right? Many dominant communities also, which are actually mainstream communities, which are actually doing well, which have political representation, which are economically influential, right? They are also claiming reservation, and that points out how the policy of reservation has been misused. The quota system actually serves a great purpose. It helps in social upliftment. It helps in uplifting the truly backward and oppressed classes, like scheduled castes, for example, scheduled tribes, right? Even economically weaker sections. Those who are socially backward, educationally backward, economically weaker, right? They deserve the policy of reservation because that is one way of uplifting these communities and creating a level playing field. But subsequently, over the decades, policy of reservation has often been misused by state governments and even by central governments. They've used this to please their electorate, to please certain communities and groups so that they can corner the votes. And this is nothing but politicization of reservation. The policy of reservation itself is not wrong. The misuse of policy of reservation is what is wrong. So today in Maharashtra, this is a very sensitive movement as well, a very delicate topic, because this incites passions in Maharashtra. So this ordinance, right, which had provided for almost 16% reservation for Marathas, it was first stayed by the Bombay High Court. Obviously, this reservation was challenged as to on what basis were Marathas given reservation. The government said that we have data to prove that Marathas are backward. What is the data? The data provided by the Narayan Rane Committee, which is a non-statutory committee. The Bombay High Court dismissed this argument of the government by saying that, see, the Narayan Rane Committee is a non-statutory committee, plus it hasn't really conducted any in-depth survey to bring data to show how Marathas are backward, or to present data to highlight the extent of backwardness amongst the Maratha community. So without any solid empirical evidence, without any justifying extraordinary situation, right, such reservations cannot be provided. That was the ruling of the Bombay High Court. So the National Commission for Backward Classes, right, the National Commission for Backward Classes had not recognized Marathas as a backward class. So Bombay High Court pointed out that the National Commission on Backward Classes says that Marathas are not backward, but a non-statutory committee headed by Narayan Rane has recommended reservation based on the assumption that Marathas are backward. So given this conflict, the Bombay High Court ordered the striking down of the reservation which had been provided. Right? The Bombay High Court pointed out that this reservation will lead to a situation where Maharashtra will cross the 50% cap on reservation. So who laid down this 50% cap? In which year, in which case? It was in the Indra Savni judgment. In 1992, following the Mandal politics, right, following the OBC reservation that was introduced in late 80s, the Supreme Court intervened with regard to policy of reservation, and in the Indra Savni case, the Supreme Court of India delivered a landmark verdict. It placed a 50% cap on reservations, and it stated that the 50% cap can be breached only if there are extraordinary circumstances, only if there is data, only if there is empirical evidence to prove that certain communities are so backward that they need reservation, even if reservation crosses 50%. Otherwise, reservation cannot be provided more than 50%. So Indira Savni judgment is like a check to prevent the misuse of policy of reservation. So based on this, the Bombay High Court dismissed the reservation that was provided, and later the Maharashtra government made a second attempt to introduce reservation to the Maratha community. So this time they set up a statutory committee. A 11-member state backward class commission headed by retired Justice N.G. Gaikwad was established, so that this commission could inquire into the socio-economic status of the Maratha community, present solid data based on which now Maharashtra could bring out another law to provide reservation for the Maratha community. So this commission, a statutory commission, right, submitted its report in 2018, and it recommended reservation for Marathas in the range of 12 to 13%. It said Marathas constitute around 28% of the population based on our data, and they are backward socially and educationally and economically. They are backward, and hence it recommended reservation of 12% in higher education and 13% in employment. So based on the recommendations of this commission, the Maharashtra government brought out another act. It introduced the Maharashtra State Reservation for Socially and Educationally Backward Classes Act in 2018, providing 16% reservation for Marathas. Cumulatively, in jobs and in education, 16% reservation was provided for. But this again was challenged at the court. This time it reached the Supreme Court. A 5-judge constitution bench, which was examining the constitutional validity of this reservation, struck down this reservation as unconstitutional. Why? Because it breaches the 50% ceiling that Supreme Court had laid down in the Indira Savni judgment. According to the Supreme Court, the findings of this commission was not enough to justify that Marathas are backward. Because every other report, independent reports, including the report of the National Commission on Backward Classes, they don't recognize Maratha community as a backward community, right? So Supreme Court saw through the political intentions, right? And it dismissed the reservation as unconstitutional, and it said that providing reservation to Marathas is not based on any exceptional circumstance. The data presented is not enough to show that Marathas are truly backward, when otherwise they are believed to be the most dominant community. So it does not justify breaching the 50% cap, and hence the Supreme Court struck down the reservation that was provided. So this was a second failed attempt by Maharashtra. So what you're seeing now is the third attempt being made to provide reservation for the Maratha community. The Supreme Court had ruled that what was established in the Indira Savni judgment is now constitutionally recognized. When it comes to quota system and reservation, right, it's a well-established constitutional fact that you can't breach the 50% reservation cap unless and until there are extraordinary circumstances. You need evidence and data to truly establish that a certain community is backward. Without that data, you can't provide reservation in breach of the 50% cap. The Supreme Court relied on this while declaring this reservation unconstitutional. It dismissed the findings of the Gaikwad Commission and established that Marathas are a dominant forward class. They're not a backward class, but they're a dominant forward class in Maharashtra. So following this, a widespread movement began in Maharashtra. Recently, you might have seen few new leaders who have propped up, right, who are leading this movement, and they claim themselves to be the representatives of the Maratha community, and they've been leading this political struggle demanding reservation, right? Yes, some members of Maratha community, quite a large number of members of Maratha community might be backward, but that is not the only basis on which reservation can be provided, right? You need to have a history of oppression or discrimination against the class of the community. They should be truly socially, educationally backward. They shouldn't be having equal access to education and employment opportunities like scheduled castes or scheduled tribes and other OBCs, right, which have been provided with reservation. So now what Maharashtra did was it established one more commission. The State Backward Class Commission was reconstituted under Sunil B. Shukre, and it submitted its report after conducting a thorough survey, because that's what the courts will ask for. If you're breaching the 50% cap, courts will ask for data. They will ask the government to prove that there is an exceptional circumstance that exists to breach the 50% cap, right? So to ensure that there is enough empirical evidence and data, the Backward Class Commission was given the mandate to conduct a thorough survey of the Maratha community. So this commission over the last few years has brought out this data. It has consulted with the Maratha community. It has consulted with all the stakeholders, and it has established that 84% of the community, they are not advanced, meaning they are backward. They account for 28% of the state's population, but 84% of the Maratha community, they can't be seen as advanced classes. They can't be seen as dominant classes. Why? Because according to this commission, a large number of Marathas are extremely poor. Why? Because many of them rely on agriculture. This is in a way valid as well, especially in the Vidarbha Ahmednagar belt, right? In the Nashik region as well. A number of Maratha families which are into agriculture, they are not financially well off, right? So, since their agriculture income is affected, and since they live in poverty, they don't have good access to education and other opportunities, the commission recommended that reservation should be provided, right? Establishing these facts and figures, the commission recommended that reservation should be extended to the Maratha community. Based on this, the new bill was drafted and now it has been passed by the Legislative Assembly. Prior to this, some castes within the Maratha community, like the Kunbi caste, they were given reservation under the OBC category. By issuing OBC certificates to the Kunbi caste within the Maratha community, these sections of the Maratha community had been provided reservation under OBC class, right? So now, non-Kunbi communities of the Maratha group, even they will get reservation through the new law. So basically, there are two different categories right now created by Maharashtra under which Maratha community is eligible for reservation. One is under OBC reservation itself, existing OBC reservation, where Kunbi caste members of the Maratha community who have the OBC caste certificate, they can claim reservation, plus non-Kunbi communities or non-Kunbi Marathas, right? They are being provided reservation with the new law. Almost 16% reservation is being extended to this new law which has been passed. However, it is important to note that it excludes the creamy layer, right? The top layer with a certain minimum income and property holding, etc., they are excluded from claiming reservation. So all the measures have been taken by the Maharashtra government this time to ensure that it stands judicial scrutiny. It's not providing reservation to all the Marathas. It is excluding some of them, those in the creamy layer, right? It is placing some communities under OBC category, and the new law provides for reservation for the non-Kunbi communities. And it has also conducted a more detailed survey this time through the Backward Class Commission. Right? It has got enough data as well to back up the claims and to justify the extension of reservation to the Marathas. But again, the big question is, will the judiciary allow this reservation to be provided? Because now in Maharashtra, reservation will touch 72%. It's already at 52%. In fact, if you take SC, ST, OBC and EWS reservation, it's already more than 52%. So with the addition of Maratha reservation, it will touch cumulatively 72%. So this goes against Indra Savni judgment. So obviously, petitions will be filed, litigation will reach Supreme Court. Now it's up to Supreme Court to decide again whether this reservation is constitutionally valid. Experts are pointing out that it is unlikely that this will pass judicial scrutiny, because it is quite established that Marathas are a forward dominant class. It's very hard to believe that Marathas are a backward class. Again, the Supreme Court might ask for data, empirical evidence, it might ask for the extraordinary circumstances. But this time, Maharashtra government has better data. So it will depend on the quality of this data, whether it can be relied upon, whether truly Marathas are a backward class. If this has to be established, right, by the government, then maybe the reservation might pass the judicial test. But experts are pointing out, by looking at the commission's recommendations, that it's unlikely to pass the test again, because the political motive is very clear. The electoral motive is very clear. The Supreme Court might declare this unconstitutional again by upholding the Indra Savni judgment and the 50% cap it has placed on reservation. Now, there are few other states as well. It's not only Maharashtra. There are few other states which have reached the 50% cap. Like Tamil Nadu, for example. In Tamil Nadu, reservation has touched almost 69-70%. Right? Tamil Nadu has tried protecting it from Indra Savani judgment by placing it under the 9th schedule. But Supreme Court has always said that nothing is beyond the purview of the judiciary. Right? Judicial review is an integral part of the basic structure of the constitution. There are few other states like Telangana, right? Even Rajasthan, Haryana, where the 50% cap on reservation has been breached. So many such cases are already going on. But repeatedly, the Supreme Court has always held that breaching the Indra Savani judgment is unconstitutional. Providing reservation beyond 50% without valid data, without justifying the extraordinary circumstances, is not valid and it will be declared unconstitutional. So this is a never-ending legal tussle which has become in India, and it again shows how the policy of reservation can be misused for political electoral reasons. It is supposed to be used for social implications, for ensuring that the truly backward communities are uplifted. But in many cases, right, starting right from the Mandal era, several communities have been demanding reservation largely on political grounds rather than the social compulsions. So this again brings up the controversial topic that whether reservation is being misused or not, whether it's misused to create vote banks, whether it is politically motivated, or do some communities truly deserve reservation? That is the question, right? And many states have, gotten into this habit of breaching the 50% cap, and all these cases reach the Supreme Court eventually, right? So now let's take up the next column from page number 8. The column talks about green jobs that are getting created in the economy as we transition towards a green economy. Around the world right now, the focus is on reducing emissions, reducing pollution, right? This is the focus of the global industry. So governments around the world, industries around the world are focused on making the economy greener and cleaner, meaning they want to reduce their dependency on fossil fuels. They want to cut back on emissions, adopt new clean energy and renewable energy to ensure that we make a transition towards a cleaner, greener economy. So those jobs which contribute to the protection of the environment, to the conservation of the environment, they are being labeled as green jobs. These are the transition jobs. This is the transition the economy is witnessing. So there are many opportunities getting created in certain sectors, and these jobs are defined as the green jobs. The ILO, International Labour Organization, defines green jobs as those jobs which play a direct or indirect role in restoration of the environment, in protection of the environment, in reduction of emissions, in tackling pollution. So as countries make this transition, this green transition, millions of green jobs will be created, right? In India itself, as we head towards 2047, right, with the vision of becoming a developed country, as India tries to abide by its commitments that we have made to Paris Agreement, to tackle emissions, to ensure that we fight climate change, India will see an enormous creation of job opportunities in the green economy sector, right? So some industries especially, they will fully benefit from this, and there are few particular industries where the green jobs are going to get created. In fact, it's already getting created. In the coming decades, we will see a further creation of jobs, millions of jobs in the so-called green sectors. So this could be clean energy, renewable energy, even manufacturing, transportation, right? These are the key industries where we are going to witness the large-scale creation of green jobs. But however, the concern of the writer of the column is that women are underrepresented when it comes to green jobs. Women may not benefit from the creation of these jobs, which highlights the gender disparity in our societies. So let's examine why women are at a disadvantage when it comes to the green industry and the green jobs, right? Most data studies, they show that men are at an advantage to capture most of this job market. Majority of these jobs will go to men in these sectors, whereas women will be largely left out. That is the argument being made by the writer. So let's examine why. See, according to this report, the annual survey of industries report, workers who are women, they are primarily employed in certain specific sectors. Women workers, especially the low skilled low paying jobs, right? So women are concentrated in few specific sectors like textiles, apparels, food and tobacco, leather, especially where more manual labor is involved. And these are not exactly the green sectors. You will not see the green transition happening in these sectors to that extent. So green jobs are not going to get created in these sectors. It will be, but it will be very minimal. So the prime sectors for green transition is manufacturing, infrastructure creation, clean and green energy and renewable energy, right? Automobile industry, transportation. These are the prime sectors. But in these sectors, majority of workers are men. Majority of the workers in these critical industries, almost 85%, are men, according to this report by the CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry. Now, why do you see this gender disparity? When it comes to manufacturing, infrastructure, transportation, or clean renewable energy, in these key sectors where the green transition is going to be very evident, where millions of green jobs is going to be created, why do you think there is gender disparity? The answer is the social discrimination that exists against women. Because there are a variety of social norms that restrict women from taking up a career opportunity in the STEM domain. To be eligible for the green jobs in these sectors, in these upcoming sectors like clean and renewable energy, or even in established industries like automobiles, infrastructure, transportation, right? You need to have degrees in the STEM domain, that is science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But women from a very young age, starting right from schools and colleges, right, they are discouraged from opting for careers in the STEM domain. That is a social norm that exists in patriarchal societies where women are discriminated against, right? There is this trend, a social trend, where women are not encouraged to opt for higher education in the STEM domain. So this naturally makes them ineligible for these jobs which are going to open up in the green sector. So men who dominate this domain, right, they easily have an advantage. That is the gender disparity that the writers are talking about. But in India, there is a very interesting fact. In India, if you look at the STEM domain, women actually have a very high share, a very high percentage compared to other countries, even developed countries. Indian women account for 42.7% with regard to the STEM domain. If you look at the STEM graduates from the science, technology, engineering, maths domain, almost 42% of the graduates are women, which is the highest in the world. Even US and European countries are behind if you look at the number of women in their STEM domain. But in India, even though we have a number of women graduates, they are not able to get jobs. The social discrimination, particularly which begins with marriage, childbirth, right, pushes many of them out of the job market, and you see dropping rates of female labor force participation. Government data itself has shown that women's participation in the labor force market has become stagnant or it has been falling. India has been struggling to bring more women into the labor force market. So even though a number of India's women are studying in the STEM domain, graduating in the STEM domain, many of them don't opt for careers in the domain, right? They are dropped out, and as a result, the gaps are filled by men. Men largely take over these roles, and they stand to benefit from the green transition, whereas the gender disparity will leave the women behind. So that is the concern being pointed out by the writer. So they're calling upon the government and the industry, right, and even our higher education sector to focus on upskilling women, to focus on mentorship, awareness, promoting entrepreneurial skills amongst women, to encourage more women to remain in the STEM domain and continue their careers in the STEM domain. In this regard, there is one positive development at the COP28 that was recently held in Dubai under the Climate Change Convention. A major global inclusive initiative was launched called the Gender Responsive Just Transitions and Climate Action Partnership. For the first time, the Climate Change Convention is focusing on the gender-related aspects of climate change and climate transition. So a global partnership has been launched at COP28 to ensure that governments, when they are carrying out the green transition in their economy, they focus on gender responsiveness. They prioritize inclusiveness to ensure that the other gender is also equally included in the transition that is going to take place in the future, right? So this is one positive point, because this gives hope that since there is a global partnership under climate change convention, it might lead to better outcomes. It might push countries to do better, to include more women in the labor force when it comes to the green sectors. So that is what the column is talking about. So now let's head towards the prelim section and take a quick look at the smaller articles that are relevant for prelims. Please look at this article from page number 1. The article says that an Indian man from Kerala has become a casualty in the ongoing war in Israel and Gaza. This happens to be the first recorded death of an Indian national in the ongoing conflict. So Hezbollah, which is a Shia militant outfit based out of Lebanon, right, which is sponsored by Iran. It is a Shia militant organization which is based out of Lebanon, which is a neighboring country of Israel. Right? It also operates in Syria. So this militant outfit is one of the proxies of Iran. Iran sponsors Hezbollah as Iran has intense rivalry with Israel. So as Israel has targeted Hamas and it has gone to war in Gaza, Iran has activated many proxies like the Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, right? So Iran has been spreading the regional conflict to bring pressure on Israel and US. And as a result, Hezbollah has been actively involved in targeting Israel ever since the Gaza war began. So this militant outfit, which has been targeted by Israel, Israel has launched airstrikes and military strikes into Lebanon and Syria, trying to hit Hezbollah targets. So Hezbollah has retaliated, and in one of the rockets fired by Hezbollah, an Indian national from Kerala has been killed. So this development highlights the human cost of the Gaza war, how it can have faraway implications, and how it can affect Indian interests as well. Right? This happens to be the first recorded death of an Indian, and this presents grave danger and concern for the number of Indians who continue to work in Israel. Right? So you should understand what is Hezbollah. It's a Shia militant organization based out of Lebanon, right? Has a presence in Syria as well. It's promoted as a proxy by Iran. Iran uses Hezbollah as a proxy to target Israel, right? And also you should understand how Indians depend on other countries for their work and livelihood opportunities. A number of Indians, they work in Israel as caregivers. Israel has a lot of old aging population. So a lot of nurses and caregivers are hired in Israel by the families. So number of Indians are employed in the caregiving and health sector. Plus, Israel has now opened up the agriculture sector and some industrial work, especially construction, because other foreign workers have fled. As the war started, many other foreign workers who were filling the gap in Israel's labor market, they have fled the country, creating vacancies in agriculture and farm sector and also in the construction industry. So now Israel desperately needs foreign labor to fill those gaps, and it has recently struck a deal with India to bring several thousands of Indians, right, who can work in Israel's agriculture and construction sector. So many Indians find the opportunity to be lucrative despite the risk, despite the ongoing conflict. And we see the outcome. One Indian has lost his life as a result of a rocket fired by Hezbollah. So that's a very important fact that you need to know. Next, on the same page, we have another related article. We recently spoke about the action taken against Paytm Bank, Paytm Payment Bank, not just by the RBI, but even by Financial Intelligence Unit India. As you know, RBI has suspended the payment banking license of Paytm Payments Bank. This has hit the company, the startup. It is going through a major financial crisis as a result of the suspension of the banking license. Right? Its stock price has taken a massive hit. Many corporate governance related issues have come up, and FIU, which is responsible for implementing Prevention of Money Laundering Act, which is responsible for maintaining due diligence and record keeping in the banking and finance industry, has started scrutinizing the accounts of Paytm Bank, and it has come up with a lot of discrepancies followed by the Paytm Bank. Now, according to reports, Financial Intelligence Unit India has come across a very startling revelation. It has noted that there were many fraudulent transactions conducted on Paytm Bank which are linked with organized criminal organizations involved in online gambling, involved in providing predatory loans, and involved in other illicit activity. So many organized criminal cartels that run extortion rings, gambling cartels, then those that provide these predatory loans, app-based loans, which has even led to a number of suicides in the country because of debt burden, right? And other illicit activity has been promoted, and the financial transactions related to it has been carried out through Paytm's bank. But the problem here is that, which has been flagged by Financial Intelligence Unit, is that these criminal activities and the funds that were connected with it has been linked with a foreign state actor. It has been linked with a foreign government agency or a government entity. Now, this is of grave concern. It highlights the linkages that exist between organized crime, money laundering, and foreign state actors who might misuse these channels to create security threats, to destabilize our country, to target our economy, to breed and create security problems, right? State actors, foreign hostile state actors might work with criminal organizations and money laundering networks to create economic destabilization and to create security challenges. So such a risk has been flagged by the FIU while investigating the record keeping of Paytm Payments Bank. It has come across certain illicit transactions and funds which were connected with criminal activities, which essentially has been linked with a foreign state actor. So most likely, it could be tied to Chinese companies, many fraudulent Chinese companies and apps which are involved in online gambling, fraudulent loans and predatory loans, right? So most likely that is the indication that we get from this particular article. It highlights the links that exist between organized crime, hostile foreign state actors, and money laundering, how these three are connected. That is what we take away from this important article. Next, on page 14, we have an article that refers to a security deal signed between China and Maldives. You all know the adverse developments in the India-Maldives relationship ever since President Muizu was elected last year, right? He has built up the anti-India sentiments and he has clearly called for India out campaign. He won the elections based on the India out campaign. So Maldivian president has clearly asked India to take back the military troops that we had deployed to maintain the helicopter and aircrafts that we had gifted to Maldives. So India tried to negotiate with Maldives, but as Maldives has insisted, India has agreed for the full withdrawal of the military personnel. We had around 88 military troops stationed in Maldives to maintain and operate the two helicopters, the Dhruv helicopters and the Dornier aircraft that we had gifted. These military platforms were helping Maldives in medical evacuation to provide immediate medical and health facilities in an emergency situation to people of Maldives, to airlift them to Sri Lanka or India or Singapore so that they can receive immediate health care and treatment if they face a healthcare situation, right? And we were also using these platforms to help Maldives in conducting maritime surveillance, maritime patrolling, thus serving a defense and security purpose as well, right? So now Maldives has ordered India to take back the military personnel and India has agreed to it. By May 10th, India will completely pull out all the troops. In fact, we have already pulled out the 88 military personnel we had deployed in Maldives. And now they are being replaced by civilian operators to just continue maintaining these aircrafts. But parallelly, Maldives has signed a security deal with China. Because see, Maldives has a lot of dependency. It is such a small country that it will require military support. It will require support in surveillance, in patrolling, in medical evacuation from some other country. Until now, it was India which was providing that. So now that Maldives is pushing India out, right, it's likely to replace India with China. So China and Maldives have signed a deal which is a continuation of the comprehensive strategic partnership that has been established between them in the last month. in January, a couple of months ago, when President Muizu visited China, China and Maldives elevated their relationship to the comprehensive strategic partnership level. So based on that, they're advancing their defense relations, and both the governments have signed a security deal or a security pact, which allows China to supply military aid, to provide military support to Maldives. So this indeed is of concern for India because it highlights the growing military presence and strategic influence of China, which undermines India's influence in the Indian Ocean. Next, we have another article on page 15 that refers to an ongoing dispute in the South China Sea. In the South China Sea, as you know, China has been very aggressive with regard to its maritime claims and disputes, and especially against Philippines. China has been resorting to very aggressive action. And there has been another incident near the second Thomas Shoal, which is a disputed site between China and Philippines. And the Coast Guard vessels of both the countries, they have collided. This is nothing new. It's been happening from many, many months. See, China claims the whole of South China Sea to itself. It has drawn this imaginary line, the 9-dash line or the U-shaped line that you can see here. It's called the 9-dash line. So this represents China's maritime claims in the South China Sea. It's claiming almost the whole of South China Sea to itself. So this pushes China into multiple maritime disputes with Vietnam, with Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and even with Philippines. So China Philippines have disputes at multiple locations, including Mischief Reef, the second Thomas Shoal, the first Thomas Shoal, and also the Scarborough Shoal. These are important locations that you have to remember. These are some of the disputed reefs and shoals between China and Philippines. And China has gotten very aggressive against Philippines. The Chinese Navy and Chinese Coast Guard, they frequently collide with fishing vessels and the naval vessels of Philippines Coast Guard and Navy. They fire water cannons. Sometimes they have opened fire as well. They have tried sinking the fishing boats of Philippines. So that is the level of aggression that Chinese naval forces and Coast Guard have shown deliberately to justify China's claims and to enhance China's claims over here. So Philippines also has been retaliating, right? Philippines also, it counters the Chinese military aggression. It has recently signed a deal with India to procure the BrahMos cruise missile, hoping to deter China and its military aggression in the region. So you have to be aware of the development and make a note of these reefs and shoals, right, which are disputed in the South China Sea between China and Philippines. Now coming to the last article, on the supplement page of the Science and Tech section, right, that is page number 2, which you find in the online edition of the Hindu, there is an image that depicts the Arctic fox. The Arctic fox is a very rare animal found in the Arctic region in the northern hemisphere. So in the Scandinavian region that comprises of Norway, Finland, and Sweden, the population of the Arctic fox has declined over the years. And these countries are making an effort to protect the species and reintroduce them to increase their numbers in the Arctic belt. So Norway, Finland, Sweden, they all have conservation programs focused on the Arctic fox. And they're trying to increase its population in the Arctic belt, in the Arctic region. So let's know some basic facts about this unique animal, and after that we can end the session for today. So this fox is also called the white fox or the polar fox. You can see how it looks. It becomes easier for you to remember, recollect if you look at the images, right? So it's a smaller sized species of the Canidae family compared to the regular foxes, right, found in tropical temperate areas. The Arctic fox is much smaller in size. The smaller body size and also the rounded shape of its body is a unique adaptation because it helps the Arctic fox to preserve body heat. Please remember this point. It is much smaller in size, right, even compared to other canines, right? Arctic fox is much smaller in size and its body has a rounded shape. This is an adaptation that the species has undergone to prevent the body heat from escaping so that it can maintain its internal temperature in the frigid climate of the Arctic, where temperatures can drop to -40, -60 degrees Celsius. So this is the range of the Arctic fox. It's usually found across the Arctic region, even in parts of Canada and Greenland, in the Scandinavian belt, particularly in Norway, parts of Finland and Sweden, and also in the Siberia region of Russia, right? So this is where you find its distribution. But it's not a threatened species. According to IUCN, its conservation status is least concern, right? Its population is quite healthy in other parts of the Arctic, but only in Scandinavian belt it has dropped and declined. So that is why these countries are working to protect the species and increase its population. So just be aware of this unique species. You can expect a possible question in your prelims. So with this, we end the discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper. Please take a look at these mains practice questions. Please make a note of them and use them for your answer writing practice. It's all based on what we have discussed earlier. You can use those points directly to build an answer, right? I've given the structure as well. In the explanation, I ensure that whatever we discuss in the first two articles, the big articles, we follow a clear structure so that you can use the same structure to write a good answer for these questions that are given. So with this, let's bring the discussion to an end. I hope you guys have liked the session. I hope you have understood everything. If you did, please let me know in the comments. And without fail, subscribe to the channel. That is it for today. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.